Hello guys, and welcome to the penultimate part in our little short series looking at Blender's material systems. Today we're going to be looking at Blender's lighting and rendering options, and next week in our final episode we're going to be going over Blender's relatively new Cycles render engine. So looking forward to that. But for today I'm going to open up the project file from last time. If you haven't got that file, head on over to the website and download it right here. But I'll just open it up right now, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the dice object because we're not going to need that today. I'm going to shut off this window just by dragging across, close this up. There we go, so we are now left with our two objects, and I'm just going to move the sphere slightly closer. And if we do a quick F12, this is what we've got. Not inspiring. And that's because our lighting isn't that good. I mean, if we look at our scene, we've got one lamp, which is the basic blender, and it's a basic blender lamp, so it's not that good for what we can do with Blender's lighting. And actually we've got a whole host of different lights we can use, and I'll get to those in a minute. But first of all, let's have a look at the light itself. If we go into the buttons window, we can see that instead of a materials tab, we have a light tab. And if I click the light, we've got a whole load of options to make our light different. So first of all, we've got a few checkboxes down here. Negative is pretty self-explanatory, it sort of inverts the light. This layer only is, again, it just means it won't affect objects on different layers. Specularity means the light casts some specularity highlights on objects, and diffuse means the light lights up diffuse. If I switch off specular and do another render by hitting F12, you see there's no shininess. And if I switch on specular and switch off diffuse, we see we've only got that shininess. So that can be good if you want to do a few different passes, but for now we'll leave them both on. This is what we got. Then we've got a few more general options. We've got the colour. I can change it to be a pink light, which affects obviously how your objects look. And we can set the energy of it, which is basically the brightness of the light. So if I set that to 0.2, I'll set this back to being white. We can then see it's much dimmer. A good option you might want to think about activating on point lights is this little sphere checkbox, and that's going to show you the distance the light travels. So if we turn this distance parameter down, it means that if I set it so it only hits the sphere, set the energy back to 1, it means that plane there isn't going to get any light cast from it. So activating the sphere is going to be very handy while you work to see what elements in your scene is going to be hit by light. And then we've got a few shadow options. If we scroll down here, we see we've got either no shadow or ray shadow. Some objects have the option of a buffer shadow, which is a sort of more fuzzy and less advanced ray shadow, but it does render quicker. And obviously we can change the colour of our shadows. You'll probably want to leave this as black. We can change the samples and a few quality settings. Again, you probably want to leave this as it is, just set it to ray shadow and then that's fine. But at the top, what I have failed to go over is we've got a whole list of different types of light, and these are literally all the types of light you can add in Blender's normal rendering. And if I go Shift A, lamp, you see you've got the same options there. Let me just activate my keys for you. There you go, now you can see what I'm pushing. Okay, so let's delete this light. We don't really want a point light in our scene. Let's go through some of the light options we've got. Now we see we've got the point light. Let's try the sunlight. I'm just going to go GZ to move it up. And you see it's similar to a point light. It looks slightly different and it's got this line coming down. Well, a sun lamp points evenly in one direction and goes evenly across a whole scene. So it has no distance. So if I rotate it on the X value, so the light direction is this way, and I do a render, you see light is directly coming that way, and you see there's no shadow because I haven't set the shadow. If I set the shadow, you can see what I mean a bit better. There we go, you can see the light is going that way, and that will be even light across the whole scene. It doesn't matter how far away objects are, they're all lit, which is good for something like a game, or if you're lighting a big scene and want some ambient light. But for this, it's not quite what we want. So I'm going to delete that. The next one is a spotlight. Now I like the spotlight because you can use it for a lot of different things. It's like on a stage production you'd have a spotlight, and it's got a set radius and it's a sort of cone light, if you will. If I render that, you can see it lights a set sort of sphere of light and from a set direction. And you see when it reaches the edge you get a very harsh shadow, and you see this has the option of the buffer shadow. If you set it to ray shadow, you can see it brings out a bit sharper shadows on these objects here. And that's got similar options. You can change the sort of the size of the spot. You can change a lot of the parameters of these cones, and the blend is the sort of fuzziness. If I turn the blend up quite a bit, you see it's a very soft edged. If I turn it up very high, you can see that slightly better, and if I turn that all the way down to 0 and do another render, you can see that's very sharp edged. So that's your spotlight. Your hemi light is literally a hemisphere of light. If I bring it up, then you can see you've got this sort of hemisphere, and that just points down. This is a very powerful light. Again, this lights evenly everywhere. It doesn't have a shadow option, but again it's good for sort of ambient light. If I set the energy down to maybe 0.1 or even less than that, you can then use different lights in your scene to make that up. And I think the final light is the area light, which is again extremely powerful, as in very bright, and it's actually just like an area. It's like a shape of light. Say a light bulb emits light, this is like a square emitting light. You can change the size of the area as you want and the distance it travels. But for our purposes, I think what we're going to use is spotlights, and this is going to go into a tinsy bit of lighting principles. I mean, there are books and videos and tons of stuff. If you look at cinematography lighting, that's very similar principles. But we're going to use a standard 3-point light setup, which is like so. It's a key light, which is on one side of your object. So I'm going to bring it to this side of my camera, and I'm just going to rotate it, and maybe bring it slightly close to the camera, and rotate it again. And this one will cast shadows. In fact, let me just bring it that way. There we go. So that's pointing at the lights, and that's our key light. And then we have a fill light, and I'll set that to ray shadow actually, because you want to have shadows directly. In fact, this fill light can even come around a bit more, because you really want it to be casting some quite good shadows on here. There we go. So we've got some shadows. Then we duplicate that into a fill light. I'm going to go Shift Z so it doesn't travel in Z space, then rotate it round. And this fills in, and this should be only about 0.4 or 0.5. This shouldn't cast shadows. This fills inside the darkness created by the other light. And finally we have a backlight, and this sort of just creates sort of edge highlighting on your objects. So if I do a backlight, you can kind of see, you can't see it very well in this example, but that will create a bit of edge highlighting around all of your objects. I mean, I haven't really set this up very well, but you get the principle I'm talking about, I hope. It brings sort of a rim highlighting. As I say, you watch a tutorial on cinematography, that'll teach you more about lighting a scene. But what I want to talk about mostly is rendering today. You have a lot of rendering options. If you go to the World tab, which is this one here, you have a load of options to change how your image comes out. So if we even click a few of these options, we can change how the horizon looks. You can see the effects. I mean, you can really just play around with these. I mean, the zenith color is sort of the main sky color, so you can set the zenith sort of a very light blue. I'll bring that down a bit. And then the horizon you can bring up to a white, or just have it looking the way your sky wants to look, and just bring the ambient up a bit. You see that changes your scene completely. I mean, that's put in a load of ambient light, which I don't actually want. But if I re-render that without the ambient light, you can see how the sky's affected the background and the whole scene. But you notice if in my render result, if I click and drag, and you watch the values at the bottom of the render result down here, you see I've got an A value, which is 1, but on the sky that is 0 alpha, so that sky isn't actually any alpha at all. So if you wanted to composite this onto different objects, you could do so. And we got a few more options. I'm just going to take off a few of these. We have ambient occlusion, which is where different objects interact. When they're close to one another, they will create a bit of darkness between them, like in the real world. Environment lighting is like ambient lighting. If you switch that down to maybe 0.5, let me just do a quick render, and you see the whole area is lit by sort of ambient light. That is way too much. Indirect lighting is where you have lighting bouncing off each other and affecting. This doesn't work so well in Blender Render. This will work better off in Cycles Render. The gather, which is about how lighting interacts. Then we have mist, which is where in the distance objects sort of fade out, and stars, which are self-explanatory. I can even render a few stars for you. You can kind of see there are stars in the background. Not very well in this example. I mean, if we turn the sky color down, you can see the stars up here, but that's pretty much it for world. You can tweak this to make your render very much different, and the render tab, which is a huge topic, and I'm not even going to be able to start going over all of this. There's some very basic stuff you can go over, like the output type. You can select what type of image or movie you want. So H.264, you can set up a compressed file or an AVI file, or have it as an image sequence. You can set it to be black and white, red, green and blue, or with an alpha channel, which obviously won't work with a JPEG sequence. If you're doing an alpha channel, you a PNG or a TIFF sequence. Oh, sorry, Targa sequence, I think it is. And you've got quite a lot of different options here. I'm not going to go over these. And the main thing is, if you hit F12, you do a render preview, and that sees what a single image. And if you go Shift F12 or just click this animation button, it will render out all the frames in your animation. And the final thing I want to talk about is the actual render result window. If you want to compare two renders, you can actually render things into two different slots. So if I wanted to compare the effect of environment lighting, so the 0.1, to when I do a normal render, what I can do is I can do slot 1, slot 2, see the effects. And you can see down there I've got some options down here to do RGB, RGBA, so with an alpha channel, black and white, and no, sorry, that's the alpha channel, not black and white, and this is the depth, so things that are close to the camera are white, and as it goes grey. And you can use this to composite. If you watch the tutorial on compositing the dragon, you'll be able to see how we can use those values. And we can switch between layers. If we set up different layers, we can see the different options we have if we set different render layers for different objects. But that's just about it for the very, very basics of lighting and rendering. As I say, this is the biggest topic since the beginning of time, probably. But as I say, look for cinematography books or cinematography tips, sorry, online for your lighting and rendering. There are tips all across the internet about different methods of rendering and how to get the best image you can. But until next time, my name's Nick Pearson. Thank you very much for watching.